Hello, welcome to my channel. When we look at the ultrastructure of a eukaryotic cell, there are different layers or different components. So we'll be talking about the outermost layer of a eukaryotic cell, that is the cell wall. Now please note, we'll be only focusing on the cell wall of eukaryotic microorganisms. So this video will not include the cell wall of plants. When we look at the phylogenetic tree of life, this is how it is structured based on the three domain classification. Now, this three domain classification was proposed in 1990 by a microbiologist named Carl Woese. So, according to him, the entire life on earth can be divided into three domains. Those are the eubacteria or bacteria, archaebacteria, which is also termed as archaea, and the eukarya or the eukaryotes. So these are the three domains under which we have different kingdoms like the archaebacteria, the eubacteria, we have protista, which includes all the protozoans, we have fungi, we have plantae, and we have animalia. All of these are the different kingdoms that were suggested by scientists before him, but he has just included all of these kingdoms under domains. Now, cell wall is a definite structure which is present external to the protoplast. What is a protoplast? Protoplast is the entire cell. The entire cell contents except or excluding the cell wall is what we call the protoplast. The living part of the cell is what we call as the protoplast. So the protoplast is bound by or external to the protoplast, we have a structure called as the cell wall. Now the cell wall is present in bacteria, it is present in archaebacteria, but then again, we will not be talking about it today in this video because these are considered as prokaryotes. We'll be talking about the cell wall of eukaryotic microorganisms, specifically the fungal cell wall and the algal cell wall. Now, algae are microorganisms which are a diverse group. So you can find more about algae in this video, but we'll also be looking at how the algal cell wall is made up. Now, protozoans or the protists don't have a cell wall. So their outermost layer is a cell membrane, which is permitting which is permitting a movement. In some protozoans, they do have a pellicle, which is made up of protein. It can be a flexible pellicle or it can be a fairly rigid pellicle, but they do not have a cell wall. So in this video, we'll be focusing on the cell wall of fungi and the cell wall of algae. Now, the function of a cell wall, whatever the organism, cell wall has certain functions. It can be tough, it can be flexible, sometimes it is rigid, but the main function of a cell wall is to maintain the cellular integrity and the cellular viability. It helps the cell to retain its components, that is integrity. It helps the cell to remain viable or alive. It also plays an important role to protect the cell from osmotic stress as well as the mechanical stress. So the cell wall is the layer which is making sure that salt movement into and outside the cell is getting controlled. The mechanical stress is, even if it is there, the cell is being protected from it due to the cell wall. And finally, on the cell wall, often there are several components like proteins which are acting as adhesins and receptors, which means they are allowing the interaction of these organisms, the microorganisms, with their external environment. Sometimes these microorganisms can be a pathogen. So these adhesins and receptors, these proteins which are found in the cell wall, have an immunogenic capacity. That is, they are able to elicit an immune response from their host. That is, in other words, they are able to promote the growth, the dissemination of that fungus or algae in their host. So these are some of the functions or roles that a cell wall plays in a fungal cell or in an algal cell. Now let us look at the fungal cell wall firstly. The composition of a fungal cell wall is quite different from that of the plants or the algae. In a fungal cell wall, there are mainly three components. First one is glucan. Now glucans are basically polymers of glucose. So you have repeated glucose units bound together, and that's what you call as a glucan. Glucans can be alpha glucan or beta glucan. Most commonly what we find is the beta 1,3-D glucan. We can even find beta 1,6 glucan or 1,4 glucan. Apart from that, you can also have alpha glucan. So fungal cell walls can be made up of either alpha or beta glucans, and these are representing 50 to 60% of the dry weight of their structure, of the cell wall structure. The next component is chitin. Chitin is again a polysaccharide which is obtained from N-acetyl glucosamine. So you have multiple numbers of N-acetyl glucosamine bound together by the enzyme chitin synthase to form the polysaccharide that is called as chitin. So glucan is a polymer of glucose, whereas chitin is a polymer of N-acetyl glucosamine. It is fibrillar and elongated in nature. Now we look at the structure of chitin in the next slide, but the chitin content can vary from one fungal cell to the other. From the morphological phase of the fungus, the chitin content will keep varying. Usually it represents 1 to 2% of the dry weight if it is an yeast cell wall, and in filamentous fungi it can reach up to 10 or 20%. So in majority of the fungal cell walls, which are the filamentous fungi, chitin is the main component. It is the primary component. In the inner fungal cell wall, this chitin is present in the form of microfibrils. One thing to remember is that even in insect cuticles you find chitin, but there the chitin is embedded in a proteinaceous matrix. So it forms a planar lamina kind of thing. Whereas in fungi, it is forming a fibrillar, or it is made up of fibrils which are arranged end to end. So this is the second component in fungal cell walls, that is chitin. The third component in the fungal cell wall is glycoproteins. Glycoproteins are basically proteins associated with carbohydrates. Proteins associated with carbohydrates by O or N linkages. Now this forms 30 to 50% of the dry weight of the fungal cell wall. In yeast especially, glycoproteins are more. When you see filamentous fungi, glycoproteins are slightly lesser, maybe around 20 to 30%. The common glycoproteins that we find are manoproteins. Manoproteins is where the proteins are associated with the sugar mannose. So there are glycoproteins which are very important in maintaining the cell shape, helping in adhesion. Like I told you earlier, they are the ones which are helping in adhesion. They are protecting the cell against different substances. They are helping in absorption, in signal transmission. So they have a range of roles when we talk about the fungal cell. Now, if we look at the cell wall, this is how the structure looks like. So we have the cell membrane from where the cell wall is arising. This is the cell membrane. External to the cell membrane, we have the cell wall. The innermost layer will be the chitin layer. Beyond the chitin layer, we will be having the glucan layer. And finally, we will be having the proteins. You can see over here the difference between a hyphal cell wall that is in filamentous fungi and cell wall that is found in yeast. So you can see over here what happens. We have the cell membrane. Beyond the cell membrane, we have a layer of chitin. Chitin is present over here. Beyond chitin, in case of the yeast cell wall, the proteins are present. So you can see over here, proteins are present. The manoproteins are present. And we also have glucans that are present. Whereas in case of the hyphal cell wall, manoproteins are present over here. These are the manoproteins, which are more number of manoproteins, and we do have some amount of the glucans as well. So the amount of glucans, the quantity of glucans, the quantity of chitins, the quantity of manoproteins or other proteins again varies based on what type of fungi we are talking about and what stage it is in. When we look at the algal cell wall is very diverse. See, algae as a group itself is very, very diverse. So the cell wall is also quite diverse. You can't say that all algal cell walls have this component. Usually outside the cell wall, there will be a gelatinous sheath, and next to that will be the cell wall. If there is a gelatinous sheath, it makes the algae quite slimy or mucoid to touch. So the gelatinous sheath is usually because of pectin that is present. So if there is pectin in the cell wall of algae, it dissolves in the water and makes the cell wall gummy, or it makes the cell wall slimy or mucoid to touch. But other than that, other than pectin, some of the common components of algal cell wall is the cellulose. So cellulose, callose, pectin, these are some of the common components that can be found in an algal cell wall. Apart from this, in some we do find chitin as well, but it is rare. Lime and silica can also be found in certain marine algae. So this again is not found in all the algae, but what is commonly present, which is a common component of all algal cell wall, is hemicellulose. So we can see that there is cellulose. These are the cellulose fibers. The cellulose is commonly present. Hemicellulose is also commonly present in the cell wall. But apart from that, presence of pectin, presence of the chitin, presence of lime, silica, these are all different from one algal cell wall to the other. What is shown over here is the algal cell wall which is found in brown algae. That is one of the groups of algae. So these are some of the common components that can be found in green algae, which is one of the groups called as chlorophyta. We have xylins, mannans, and we have cellulose as well. In brown algae, we have mucopolysaccharides called as fucoidin. We can see that over here in this picture as well. So we have the fucoidin matrix, which is present here. It's a proteinaceous matrix. And we also have rhodophyta. In red algae, we do have other polysaccharides as well, like galactins, and apart from that, cellulose. So cellulose and hemicellulose are some of the common components of algal cell wall, but the other components keep changing from one group to the other. It is quite diverse in case of algae. I hope this video was useful to all of you, and see you all in the next video, where we'll be talking about the other parts of the eukaryotic microbial cell as well. Thank you.